classes, which was very fun. And throughout the week when I was thinking about children and faith, the idea of childlike faith, but also just it's so interesting to see children start to understand the concept of faith and God, and the different questions that they ask. And it reminded me, I don't know, has anyone here ever heard of Fowler's Stages of Faith? I think this is a really cool resource. It's in the back of your bulletin is the Still Voice. It's kind of our Bible study that's been back here every week. But it's in the back here, and there's an article that you can click on if you're more interested in it. I think it's fascinating. So I'm going to go over that with us a little bit, because I think you guys will get a lot out of it. But basically, Fowler's Stages of Faith, there's 7 stages. I'll go over them quickly. But there's stage 0, which is the primal undifferentiated faith. This is birth to 2. So this stage is very much like trust versus mistrust. The next stage is intuitive projective, ages 3 to 7. So children at this age have acquired language and the ability to work with symbols to express thoughts. Stage 2 is the mythic literal faith, so ages 7 to 12. Children at this stage have a belief in justice and fairness in religious matters and a sense of reciprocity in the workings of the universe. So good will result in good, bad will result in bad. Now this is where things start to get kind of interesting. Stage 3 is the synthetic conventional faith. So they say this could be ages 12 to adult. So just like maturity, we know that maturity doesn't really have to do with age. To a certain extent it does, but we all know those that are at different ages and different maturity levels. The same thing becomes true of faith. So starting at stage 3 is where it's not so much about age as it is about the faith and understanding that you have. So this stage, stage 3, is characterized by the identification of the adult with a religious institution, belief system, authority, and the growth of a personal religious or spiritual identity. So someone starts to take on their own spiritual identity. Then stage 4 is individuative reflective faith. So sometimes ages mid-20s to late 30s. This stage is often characterized by the angst and struggle as the individual takes personal responsibility for her beliefs or feelings. Stage 5 is the conjunctive faith. They call this the midlife crisis. A person at this stage acknowledges paradoxes and the mysteries attendant on transcendent values. This causes the person to move beyond the conventional religious traditions or beliefs he may have inherited from previous stages of development. So at this stage is maybe when people start to question their faith. You know, they want to make it more personal, so they explore their doubts, they explore a lot of different things, maybe they do some deconstruction. And then stage 6, this is really interesting, is universalizing faith or enlightenment. And it says later adulthood, but it says this stage is only rarely achieved by individuals. So some people will never get to this stage. Most people will never get to this stage, which is really interesting, especially if you're a person that says, well, I want to climb to the top. You know, if someone else can do it, why can't I do it? It said a person at this stage is not hemmed in by differences in religious or spiritual beliefs among people in the world, but regards all beings as worthy of compassion and deep understanding. Here, individuals walk the talk of the great religious traditions. One good example of this stage in the life of an individual is the life of Count Leo Tolstoy, who in his later years emphasized the importance of equality among people, asceticism in one's style of living, and the practice of compassion for all people. So I encourage you to look more deeply into this, but I think it's a really interesting way to view our faith throughout our life. I like to think of myself as stage 6, but that's probably not accurate because I'm still in my early 30s, and it says people rarely achieve that stage. So while I like to think I'm that mature in faith, it does help me to think back and say, well, what stage am I really at? And that's my question for you guys today. It's for you to really think about, no matter how old you are, you could be the oldest person in this congregation, you could be the youngest person in this congregation. Where is your own individual faith journey at? It's a really interesting thing for us to stop and think about. And one of the really cool things I think about church, one of the last thing that I'm really going to talk about is like, what's the difference between faith and church? Because I think you can have a faith outside of church. You can know about Jesus, you can love Jesus, you can have morals and values and not go to church. Even as a pastor, I think that's true. Now, what's the difference then between church? Why church? So I'd say church is where you practice your faith. It's one way to live out your faith, and it helps you do it well. In verse 5 today in our scripture, it says, that was before where we started, but it says, I'm the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Now that might sound harsh, but really what I think it's saying is that by coming together as an institution or even just a group of people, we can do God's work more effectively. We can do God's will. We can carry out his message of loving other people, doing justice, equality, all of those things. I also think that the church is where it helps us to empathize with people. It teaches us things. It's where we can support people's needs. It's where we can welcome people, where we can grieve with people. And one of the biggest things for me is I think this is where we can be challenged. For some of us, we have friends or family who will call us out. And to be honest, we all need to be called out for bad behavior because none of us are perfect. And whether you are like my 3-year-old or you're 34, we all act out sometimes. And I realize there's not many places in our society anymore that are willing to call each other out. And not in a shameful, you've sinned typed of way, but in a way that refines us and makes us better, that holds us accountable for our actions so that we can learn to love one another better. For some of you parents, you might know Dr. Becky. I don't know if you know her. She's a child psychologist, and she talks a lot about tactics to get your children to behave well. And she's big on the fact that punishment doesn't work. Now, I know some people are going to be like, what? Of course punishment works. I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but her point is that with stereotypical punishment, you know, for my 3-year-old, if I threaten to take away TV time or dessert, well, if you're like Sophie, she says, I don't care, I didn't want those things anyway. And then you're like, okay, well, I need a new game plan. But even if that threat does, you know, make them obedient in the moment, most times without threatening them again, they're not going to say, oh, wait, if I hit my brother or sister, that means I'm not going to get X, Y, or Z. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work like that, even if we want it to work like that. So for Sophie, what I started doing was asking her, do you want to start over? So she's stubborn, and it's very hard for her to admit that she's wrong, or to say she's sorry, or to start over on her own. She needs me to give her the option, the opportunity. And I was amazed at how many times when I said, Sophie, do you want to start over? How many times she took me up on it. It was like a relief. Okay, my mom gave me a way out because she can't control her emotions. And she doesn't want to keep the tantrum, but she doesn't know how to stop the tantrum. So I'm giving her a way out. And I think that's what the church is like a lot of times. The church is saying, you have an infinite number of times to start over. Because sometimes we don't know how to stop our bad behavior. We don't know how to stop our bad thoughts. We don't know how to stop our anxiety, our frustrations, these hard things in life. We don't know how to get into a better way of grieving things. But the church is here to say, you can start over. And we can do this again, and we can do it better as many times as it takes. So that's one of the cool things that I really like about church, and I think that that's one of the differences between faith and church, is while maybe you don't need to come to church Sunday mornings to believe in Jesus, but I definitely think that it helps us serve Jesus better and do God's will on this earth. So it's hard for our faith to be challenged outside of a church community. Like I said, I don't know about you, it'd be interesting for you guys to think back on your weeks, your family, your friends. How many people do you have telling you some hard truths throughout your life? I know for me, there's some, but there's not that many. But I know that when I come here, in a loving way, I have people giving me some hard truths that make me a better person.